Chicago's shelter system has 3,000 beds. On the night the temperature dropped to minus 23 degrees, the city's largest shelter took in more than 1,000 people in a single building. Staff put mats on every inch of available floor, and when there was no more floor, they turned people away. This is what happened to the ones who had nowhere left to go. On paper, Chicago's shelter network offers about 3,000 beds each night. That number stands in stark contrast to the 18,836 people counted as homeless during the city's most recent point-in-time survey. The gap is even wider when advocacy groups tally everyone who cycles through homelessness over a year. Estimates reach as high as 76,000. The city's official capacity, even with every bed filled, leaves thousands on the outside. When winter hits, the system is tested to its limit. Shelters like Pacific Garden Mission stretch far beyond their listed occupancy, but the math never adds up. There are simply not enough beds for the people who need them. The shelter shortage is not temporary, nor is it a matter of a few unlucky nights. Each winter, emergency protocols add a few hundred mats in community centers or warming buses, but these measures are brief and limited. Even at full surge, the city cannot close the gap between available beds and the real number of people seeking shelter. The numbers are not just statistics. They represent the choices forced on thousands each night. Risk the cold, or hope for a spot that rarely opens. Julie Dworkin of the Night Ministry points to a persistent misconception. It is often said that people are homeless because they choose to be, or because there simply aren't enough resources. In reality, most are searching for a permanent place to live. That is the one thing the city system does not offer. The shelter network, built as a stopgap, becomes a revolving door. For those left outside, the system's limits are not an abstraction. They are a matter of survival. On January 29, 2019, the temperature in Chicago plunged to minus 23 degrees Fahrenheit. For 52 straight hours, the city never rose above zero. The National Weather Service called it a life-threatening emergency. Every hour below zero meant greater risk for anyone outside, a reality that hit hardest for those with nowhere to go. Inside Pacific Garden Mission, the city's largest shelter, staff abandoned their usual intake rules. They took in anyone who showed up, no questions asked. That night, 1,081 people crowded into a building designed for less than half that number. Mats covered the auditorium floor. Hallways became sleeping quarters. The usual 30-day stay limits were ignored. The goal was simple: keep as many people as possible from freezing to death. Across the city, officials scrambled to expand capacity. 5 CTA buses ran overnight as makeshift warming centers. Community centers, libraries, and police stations opened their doors, adding 500 surge beds to the shelter system. The city's emergency memos show every available site pressed into service. Still, it was not enough. Reports from the Night Ministry and outreach workers documented people being turned away at full shelters, redirected to buses that filled up within minutes, or left to wait outside in sub-zero wind chills. The numbers tell their own story. Even with surge measures, thousands remained unsheltered that night. The system, already stretched thin, could not absorb the shock of the cold. For many, survival came down to luck: a spot on a bus, a mat on the floor, or the willingness of a staff member to bend the rules. For others, the doors stayed shut. The cold did not discriminate, but the shelter system did. A married couple arrives at a shelter door just after midnight, shivering from the wind. Staff check their paperwork, see no space in the family unit, and ask them to separate. The rule is clear: single-sex dorms only, even if that means splitting up on the coldest night of the year. They choose to stay together, outside, huddled on a bench. By morning, both need emergency treatment for hypothermia. A few blocks away, a young mother stands at the threshold of a crowded warming center, her pit bull on a leash. The intake worker shakes her head. The shelter contract bans pets except for certified service animals. The mother refuses to abandon her dog. She sleeps on the sidewalk, clutching her animal through the night. The next day, her only companion is sick, and she is still waiting for a spot in the city's rare pet-friendly program. Another woman, escaping violence at home, seeks safety at a women-only shelter. The intake form asks about her past. Because she has a recent assault on her record, she is turned away for the safety of other residents. With nowhere else to go, she finds shelter under an overpass, and she is assaulted again before sunrise. A fourth man, visibly intoxicated, approaches the front desk of a shelter as temperatures drop. An intake worker cites a city audit. 24% of all applicants are denied entry for intoxication or substance use. He is told to come back sober. That night, he sleeps in a bus shelter, exposed to sub-zero wind chills. Each of these stories is shaped by written policy, contract language that enforces single-sex rules, pet bans, and substance use exclusions. Even the city's 311 hotline, meant to connect people to shelter, becomes a barrier when a working phone or a verified address is required. These rules are not abstract. They decide who is left in the cold each night. Cold is not just discomfort on Chicago streets. It is a medical emergency measured in minutes and hours. At minus 23 degrees, exposed skin can freeze in less than 10 minutes. Hypothermia, the silent killer, can set in within hours, especially for those who never make it through a shelter door. A University of Illinois Chicago study tracked 96 deaths in which cold exposure played a direct role. The city's own records show around 250 cold-related deaths since 2006, the majority among people without shelter. Outreach workers know these numbers are not distant statistics. During the polar vortex, the night ministry logged more than 2,500 contacts in just a few days, offering blankets, food, and a van ride to the nearest site with space. But even the most determined crews run up against limits. The Salvation Army's warming centers, open only at night, saw 150 to 200 visitors each, but could not offer beds, only a chair and a cup of coffee. Mutual aid groups handed out hundreds of emergency kits, but by sunrise, many recipients were still outside, fighting off frostbite. The city's emergency response is built around surge capacity, temporary beds, borrowed buses, and volunteers, but the need always outstrips the supply. Each turnaway is a gamble with survival. Outreach logs show that people denied entry because of full shelters, intoxication, or lack of paperwork often end up in emergency rooms if they make it at all. The cost is measured not just in suffering, but in lives lost each winter, year after year, as the same barriers remain in place. Chicago's homelessness crisis is measured not just in frozen nights, but in numbers that rarely make the headlines. Over the course of a year, the Chicago Coalition to End Homelessness estimates that 76,375 people experience homelessness, 4 times the city's official point-in-time count. The city's shelter system, even after a 2025 merger that consolidated migrant and traditional beds, now offers 6,800 beds. That is less than a tenth of those who need shelter at some point each year. For those seeking a permanent place to live, the average wait for housing stretches to 1,573 days, more than 4 years. The city increased its homeless services budget by 21%, but at the same time cut more than a quarter of its staff, leaving fewer outreach workers on the streets. Since 2006, around 250 people have died in Chicago from cold exposure, most while unsheltered. The burden of this crisis falls hardest on Black Chicagoans, who make up 72% of the homeless population despite being less than a third of the city's residents. Every winter brings the same urgent demands from those who know the system best. Policy analyst Lee Friedman calls for a 24-hour, city-run warming hub with at least 1,000 beds. No intake screening, no questions asked, just a place to survive the night. Julie Dworkin and other advocates insist on ending the ban on pets, so people are never forced to choose between shelter and their only companion. Integrated medical transport, vans, or teams stationed at shelters on sub-zero nights would mean no one is turned away because they cannot walk or because an ambulance never came. Above all, experts press for permanent housing as the real solution, not just more temporary beds. The asks are simple: keep couples together, welcome pets, provide medical rides, and fund housing first. These are not new ideas. They are the changes named by those living outside again and again every time the temperature drops. Tonight, over 65,000 Chicagoans have no fixed address, but only 3,000 shelter beds exist. Survival in sub-zero cold is not a matter of choice. It is a policy decision. Permanent housing remains out of reach, and the system keeps repeating its failure. The cold is predictable, so is the neglect.